Hello and welcome to another video. So today we're taking a look at BloodCraft in Unlimited, and this one is pretty much a pure aggro bat, I guess you could call it. That's really all I can think of that you could probably name this, but straight up just aggro blood, just super hardcore aggro blood. Pretty traditional, as pretty much all of the early game is pretty normal, and even the late game pretty normal, and also exceedingly cheap, with the highest costing card being, of course, Goldvania, but still such an amazing deck. I went pretty easy with this deck. It would definitely lose some of the more control healing oriented decks, but overall extremely solid. So we're going to get right into this and check it out. So starting us off for this video, we are up against Shadow, another deck that can be very aggressive. Going first does help us out quite a bit. Of course, that does make this deck a lot more solid. Out of all the games I played with this deck, I only really lost one, I think, and that was just purely because I got a really bad hand and a really bad start. Otherwise, I usually would win in most of my matchups with this deck, typically. I didn't play a super large amount of matches for this sample size, but I feel like if I did, I would still average out at around a 70% win rate pretty comfortably with this deck, at least in the very current meta for Unlimited. As that's how solid I believe this deck to be for myself. Of course, again, I'd need a much larger sample size to know for sure. But really, you just go as aggressive as you can. Urias and a turn 1 play are kind of your two key cards for the early game, and then you kind of want your mid game to consist of Vania and things like Summon Bloodkin, while of course your very key cards for your late game are Dark General and of course Implanter to get any kind of extra end game damage. So I decided to go for Night Horde. No point using it with Vania in this situation. May as well just keep going face, pushing that damage. If you make it hard for them to continue to clear, that's the most important thing, but this was not a fun experience. I mean, having to go up against a Lady of Flies, which of course they get ward. Great. At least we did manage to get a couple of damage pings out of that, which is going to be fairly reasonable. So I had to try and come up with kind of the best way I could to maximize my damage. Maybe I could have done a better job, but I feel like I didn't do too bad. I mean, I got as many bats as I could to stick to the board, while at the same time pinging damage. And then setting up, of course, Goblin. Making it very hard to make a recovery for the Shadow player. Especially with Disciple of Silence. Honestly, not a bad option. It's not going to be impossible to win this. I just need at least one good draw here. And there it is, Savage Wolf. So that is our lethal. Of course, you don't want to attack with Savage Wolf into Silence because it will lose attack. But if I use my bats to kill it, then I could easily use Wolf to go for 2 damage lethal. Up next, of course, we have Sword, another deck that can be extremely aggressive, especially in Unlimited. I found that majority of Sword matches are very aggressive. They've also got the Alt Albert. It's one of the few leaders I kind of wish I had because I don't really like many of the Sword leaders, and I think Albert would actually be an alright one to have. Fortunately, it's just one of the probably half that I don't have from the old leaders. But we start off very strong. Again, Goblin on turn 1 is a very important play, especially against the Sword matchup. You can't really afford to not play something. And this turn actually looks pretty promising. The Bahamut's going to do a nice job pulling that Ambling Wraith, and we're going to get a little bit more damage in, which is always a good thing. And we don't actually do too bad a job here. They did focus, of course, clearing the Urias, which I definitely agree with, and us favoring damage is very important. And with Dance of Death and Savage Wolf, it's going to shape up to be a fairly good matchup and a fairly quick one as well. Honestly, if I was looking to climb right this second into the ranks, it would definitely be with this deck. If I didn't play so many janky decks to try and make videos for you guys, I would probably run this deck straight up to Grandmaster kneeling. Or at least for as long as I could. That, and I would also need the time to just sit down and dedicate to Grandmaster. And here it is. 6 damage to the face. Turn 5 lethal. Pretty much zero issue. For our final matchup, we have Blood versus Blood. I mean, what a note to finish on. Blood versus Blood. Even with 3 games, Blood is so easy to cram into a video, it's absolutely ridiculous most of the time. I find it very hard to try and reach the kind of 10-minute-ish mark that I really like to reach with these videos when I'm playing a Blood deck. Just because of how aggressively these Blood decks play out and how quick their games can just be over. And of course, Goblin, not a bad way to start. Again, going first does help, but going second, if your opponent doesn't play on 1-drop, can work out quite well. And we did go for a very favourable double ambling Wraith. This matchup doesn't play out quite as similar as the last 2 matches, but still fairly good. I mean, we've basically forced them to use this Wolf here, so I like that. I mean, less damage we're taking, the better. And we can set up our own Savage Wolf. Why not? Now, this is where things are going to get a little more interesting. So they did go for the Florus, but and then they concede. Okay. I forgot this match it conceded just that quickly, but still, not bad. So even though the last match was literally my opponent being driven into a corner, it definitely was still really solid. I actually didn't get much of a chance to use Implancer, and for some reason I was thinking Dark General was in the deck, but it's not. It's actually Scarlet Saber, which as a one-of is actually still fairly decent. Honestly, you're just relying on mainly that early game, and really, it does a wonderful job. I really couldn't fault it for the most part. Other than, of course, losing to a heavy control-orientated deck, that's really about it. This deck's just that solid. The only other risk, of course, is an extremely heavy aggro deck, and if you start off with a not-so-great hand, you will probably lose. But, for the most part, I had a lot of fun with it. Definitely a very solid deck. Hopefully you guys can enjoy it. I'll leave the link to the deck in the description below. Until next time, see ya.